To call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting. Roll call, please.
Member Castellanos?
Present.
Member Capola?
Present.
Member Dugan?
Present.
Member Gately?
Present.
Member Magnolia?
Present.
Member Pena?
Present.
Mayor Nicholson?
Present. If you could all please join me in rising for a salute to the flag. Allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We will just take a recess until 5:15 to begin the interview.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. McCaskill.
Good evening,
McCaskill.
everyone. Good evening. Good evening.
Welcome,
How's everyone?
welcome. We'll give you a chance to get settled here so we can start right at 5:15 because that's where we advertised it, but we just didn't want to give you plenty of time to get settled.
Thank
so we
you
didn't
very
jump right
much.
into it.
Thank
Yeah.
you very much.
Yep.
Good to see everybody. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Nice to meet you today.
Thank you. The pleasure's all mine.
Hood School was pretty impressive.
It's always good going through schools because you can look at what you can steal from other schools.
That is a good way to do it. I like that one.
I didn't think of it like that.
That's smooth.
Some of the best ideas you see from other schools and other districts. So.
Red Bull. Red Bull sponsored this. I called on the same.
All right, so let's come back in session, and we will start with our first interview. The next item on the agenda is Mr. Kevin McCaskill. Kevin, welcome so much to the Lynn Public Schools. We're very excited to have this conversation. The format for this evening is we will rotate through school committee members to ask their questions, and we will start with member Magnolia.
Mayor Nicholson, are we introducing ourselves as we do this
Yeah.
for the candidate?
Sure,
Would that be
I think that makes
useful?
sense. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So welcome so much, Mr. McCaskill. My name is Tiffany Magnolia. I am a very recent school committee member, just having been elected in 2021. I'm also a professor at North Shore Community College. So
Right.
I bridge the higher ed K through 12 gap here on the school committee. And I have your first question.
Thank you.
Serving our most vulnerable students, undocumented, teen parents, gender nonconforming, etc., takes a combination of policies, procedures, and caring teachers, school personnel. What do you see as the superintendent's role in ensuring that our most vulnerable students are safely and rigorously educated?
Thank you for that question. And it goes back, when we say all means all students mean all. And that goes for our most vulnerable students. Most importantly, what are those support systems that we have for students, our special education students, our LGBTQ students, our EL students? What are those supports that are really going to ensure that all means all? Making sure that we have those structures in place and supports from our welcome centers, from the moment that they are walking through to register to the time they are walking across one of our esteemed high schools, that they have had that 13-year support going through the Lynn Public Schools. So again, just to reiterate, making sure our structures are in place for support from an instructional perspective, from a social emotional perspective, from a programming perspective as well, making sure we have those items in place to ensure that this is the greatest educational experience that our students will have.
Thank you.
Well, good evening, Mr. McCaskill.
Good evening. How are you doing?
Yeah, we met earlier, but my name's Eric Dugan. Like Dr. Magnolia, I'm fairly new. About a year now, right? Yeah, so not that new anymore, but I was one of the newbies. I'm a third grade teacher in a neighboring town, not in Lynn,
Right.
but in a neighboring town. Just to give a little background about myself. And my question for you, or my first question for you is, from going through your paperwork, I see you've been in education for quite some time. What do you think of all this time you've been in education, your most rewarding professional experience is? Or maybe give us a little narrative of that.
I think all 35 years has been rewarding at some point in time. But if I go back, I think when I really look back through the annals of my career, I look back at the 2 years that I was at William N. DeBerry Elementary School as the principal. I had spent 14 years in middle school, and I came from private industry. Great experience in middle school. But when it really came to look at those foundational pieces of how students learn and what are those pieces of supports that not only students but families needed, in those 2 years, I gained literally a doctorate in what education was all about. And it really prepared me for my next stint at Putnam Vocational, believe it or not. So I always look back at those foundational years in which we are which we're really formulating the educational process for our youngest and at times our most vulnerable students, and how do we prepare them for every single level, and those foundational pieces are so important. But I look back at my experiences on the high school level, from at Putnam Vocational, and how we were really preparing young people not just to get a diploma, but how are we preparing them for the next realm of their life. If they're going into the world of industry directly from high school, or preparing to go into one of the institutions of higher education, how those supports work in congruence to our, obviously, the policies that we set to get them there, the structures that we have in place. So those, but at the end of the day, seeing students have a great experience. Students that might have struggled and turned it all around. Those things you cannot put a price tag on. And seeing the glow, the tears of joy from families who have known the struggles that their child, but yet they have risen, like the phoenix rising from the ashes. They have seen success, and we were part of that. And so being a part of the success of students and even families, really galvanizing families. I mean, they have been so satisfying for 35 years, and hopefully they will continue here at Lynn Public Schools.
Great. Thank you for that answer. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Good evening, Mr. McCaskill.
Springer, how are you, sir?
Or Brian?
Question going to Brian? Or?
We're just going to go down the line.
All right. Okay. Very well. Sorry about that.
I pivoted. I was ready. I was actually gonna go ahead. He's wise. We got the. He's ready to go. So
Going by the list.
yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for being here tonight and submitting that application. I got to review a lot of your work, and I think that my question actually it's going to be around some of that your vocational experience actually.
Sure.
And my question is, according to a recent NPR article, high-paying trade jobs cite empty while high school grads line up for university. Lynn needs high-paying jobs, and we have a vocational school. What does vocational expansion mean to you? How would you achieve this as superintendent, and could you elaborate on some of your vocational experience, please?
And I was, just from the experience perspective, I spent 6 years as the principal at Putnam Vocational in Springfield. And the same question, believe it or not, was asked in Springfield back in 2004. And at that time, in 2004, Putnam was out of 360 some odd high schools. It was next to last. And that was across the board, from attendance, metrics for MCAS and as such, but most importantly, the business industry had really lost favor in it. Fast forward to 2010, which was our last year as a administrative team, enrollment had risen to over 1,600 students. From 989, and give you exact numbers, to 1,632 students, and that was through an application process. The school consistently had a 500 student wait list. It became the #1 school of choice in Springfield, and that was because industry backed the school. Bay State Health Systems became a valid partner, and not just from the nursing perspective or the health fields. That one entity had trade areas. That entity had a business office. It had all the programs that we had entailed in there. So they were really looking, how do we fulfill? And they were the largest employer within the city of Springfield. And so that connection alone, just that one connection, really solved an issue of having a major player saying, if we have this school preparing students in these particular areas, we will take them. We will take them on. Fast forward to Madison Park, we've had a summer with enrollment. As you know, Madison Park is well documented. But from 2015, where the student body, I think it was down to about as low as 841. My last year at Madison Park, we were up to 1,161 students, and that was in competition with 36 other high school entities in the city. It was the largest open enrollment school, the only open enrollment school that had gained enrollment and over a consistent 5-year period. But again, it was the industry partners that really began to show their merit where they came on board. When you're looking at Mass General, you're looking at the unions, especially the Carpenters Union, Local 103, that's the electrical union, the Local 7, which is the iron workers. They really came to task because, as you indicated in that article, these positions are laying dormant. And most importantly, they are not diverse. And at Madison Park, over 90% of ours, 97% to be exact, were of students of color. So we fit the bill to fulfill not only those positions, but to increase the diversity within those fields. And it's not to say that, and one of the reasons why I was taken, well, Superintendent Caecilius indicated she wanted me to move the central office. How do we get these programs, some of these programs, within some of our open enrollment schools? Not that we want to replicate, but when you look at industry, especially Industry 4.0, you're looking at renewable energy, you're looking at green building technology and smart building technology, which requires coding and the such. These are things that we can easily apply into some of our schools to provide those opportunities within those fields to really give students not only a heads up, but a leg up going forward towards, again, now it gives them that opportunity to work either directly after high school because they have not only the marketable skills, but the industry recognized credentials to get there, but also have the opportunity to go into a post-secondary education program, which again, if it's in coding, the more education you have, the more you can earn. So really to increase all those opportunities. And I see Lynn Tech as a vital piece, but as we were coming back, we were talking about what do we do at Lynn English or Lynn Classical? Well, there are all types of opportunities that the regional vocational programs have started with the After Dark programs, in which students can go participate. If we have the teaching staff, a 3 to 5 program or 4 to 6 program for those students to come in and take a particular field. Again, we don't have to look at some funding, but the state has been very encouraging of providing startup funding for that. So these are the opportunities that we can really look at to really gain some ground on providing opportunities, and goes back to Ms. Magnolia to all means all. So really providing those opportunities for quite a few more students. But I get excited, as you can see, when I start talking about career tech, because I think it's something that it's just not a novel idea. It is a true approach to really meeting the needs of not only students, but their families as well.
I really appreciate that robust explanation. Also, I failed to introduce myself. I'm Brian Castellanos. I'm also a member of the Lynn School Committee.
All right, Castellanos, a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
All right, we'll try this again. Good evening, Kevin.
Good evening.
My name is Lenny Pena. I'm a member of the school committee, fairly new, like my other colleagues, and we met during the search.
Absolutely.
At the other interview, and my question is around, today we have a lot of safety concerns with, as a parent, and I'm a parent of 3 students in the school, Lynn Public Schools. How important do you feel to report emergency situations to parents and stakeholders when they occur in our school system and during our school system?
Anything of it. I mean, as a parent of 4 who have all graduated from the Springfield Public Schools, I would want to be made aware as soon as things occur. So I think immediacy and expediency is something that we should look at, and not should look at, we should do. I think making sure that folks are informed, but making sure that we are informed with all the information possible and being very transparent with what we have with that certain situation going forward. If details are very sketchy, I'm always one to say, well, let's hold off and indicate that we do not have all the information, because we do not want to speculate, which I think exacerbates the issue itself. So making sure that we are sharing information, obviously not sharing information that violate FERPA and HIPAA laws, obviously, but making sure that we are informing parents in a very expedient manner going forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
Hi, we're going to me now. I'm Lorraine Gately.
How are you this evening?
School committee for like 8 years. I'm going to skip down to my second question. I'll come back to my first question.
Sure.
We will be searching for a new executive director of special ed. So what qualities would you, as a superintendent, recommend we be looking for in our search?
Someone who's well-versed and well-schooled in special education and the policies and regulations that they abide by and align themselves to. Someone who really believes in a more progressive approach. And what I mean by progressive, we do not pigeonhole students for a lifetime in special education where they're down in the basement and such, where we are looking for models that really accentuate the talents, again, in accordance to those IEPs that are written. Someone who really looks at innovation, because I think in some instances, we are still looking at older models on educating students as opposed to what are those, especially when it comes to assistive technology. I don't think we use enough of it. So looking at someone who is really progressive in thought, someone who can align themselves to the laws and regulations of special education, and someone who can really communicate a vision for special education as well, that aligns to the mission, the vision, and the beliefs of the Lynn Public Schools.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Donna Capola.
How are you, Mr. Capola?
Good, and I have been on the committee the longest. I'm not going to talk about the numbers. Mine is also on Lynn Tech.
Okay.
You know, obviously, we can only fit so many students in there.
Absolutely.
So space is an issue, and space across the city is an issue, even in
Absolutely.
the high schools. But Lynn Tech has a wait list of 400 students, with the city putting in a new zoning plan to encourage industrial commercial growth, hoping to attract jobs in the life sciences and the manufacturing industry. How can we expand our vocational technical program outside of Lynn Tech? I know we have After Dark, and
Sure.
I know you're aware of that. But what other ideas would you have?
Really utilizing some that are already on the books with respect to DESE, the innovation pathways. And there are programs, obviously, that we do not have at Lynn Tech, and obviously because of space conditions that we cannot add. But who's to say that these programs cannot be housed within one of the other two schools? And one of the things that we tried to do in Boston, where Boston has gone that innovative pathway method, where we have schools that have health academies, which is a big program at Madison Park, a Chapter 74 program. But you see a Chapter 74 program at English High School for health assisting, again, because there is such an overload of students who want these positions, but obviously space is an issue at Madison Park. So opening up spaces in which the demand is very high, in which students want it, in which industry says there's a need, of really looking at those opportunities. I know that in the first interview, we talked about biotech coming in to Lynn. Well, I don't believe that does Lynn Tech have biotech? And I don't know if they do or not. I don't think they do. But the question becomes, well, if it's a need and we want Lynn residents working in the biotech field here in Lynn, who's to say that their program cannot start out as an innovation program, an innovation pathway at a Lynn English or at a Lynn Classical? And if time, talent, and treasures can be aligned, that can become a Chapter 74 program in due time. So really look at timing, and I know with scheduling is also an issue as well. Lynn Tech, if I recall, they have similar vocational schedule, week on, week off. When you look at Lynn English and Lynn Classical, they don't have that schedule. So there will have to be some adjustments if that were to come to fruition. But we look at every single avenue to really pursue those opportunities. But as I indicated with Mr. Castellanos, industry is going to drive that, and they've got to be a valid partner. What is needed? What is going to be needed within that field? Can they supply it? They're being a part of the program advisories. There's just so many other facets of this unique approach that can happen. It's not like maybe they can happen, but it has to be in a structured and organized process. And I really see some great things coming out of there. Computer tech, anything with IT or computer programming, those are easily implemented. But it's about time and scheduling and making sure that we have the qualified professionals to do it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm Jared Nicholson. I'm the mayor. I was previously on the school committee for 3 terms. And my question is, the district and school committee have elevated diversifying our workforce, both the administration and faculty, all staff as a priority. How would you recruit and retain staff that represent the racial, ethnic, linguistic diversity of our district?
One of the things that in our travels today, I indicated as a little sidebar, but I was kind of serious about it. In my former life as a principal, I would go to my colleagues, if I know that you have good people, I'm taking your good people. I'm coming in and recruiting your best people. And I said, I want you to know it face to face, so I'm not accused of going behind your back. But I say that tongue in cheek. I go after talent. Trust me, I go after talent. If there's talent anywhere, we're going to get it. I bring back to my years as a junior college basketball coach, sitting in a living room with a recruit and his parents. That's how I would be with staff coming in that we would want. Really aggressively going after talent. And again, when we talk about diversity, and I go by the research, students learn and who can identify with individuals within their own race and identity. And it's not to say, to be very blunt, that white educators cannot educate black and brown students, but that identification piece is so strong because, again, there may be that recognition that, well, if they can do it and they're talking to me, then I can do it because I identify with them. So that would be very intentional with that, because again, diversification, and as I said in my initial interview, that was something that was very near and dear to my heart at Putnam Vocational, increasing the diversity of our staff by over 30% in 6 years. And that was on both sides of the house with both academic and vocational, and at Madison Park as the same. We want to really give our students, and it doesn't matter what race, ethnicity, or orientation, we want to put them in front of the best people available that they can identify with. And that would be a mission on a daily basis of getting quality, not just teachers, not just principals, all staff members in front of our folks, and in front of our students who are our constituents.
Thank you so much. Do you have any specific thoughts as well on the retention side of it? So in addition to the recruitment?
No, that's everything, Mayor Nicholson, because you can recruit the best people, and similar to going back to the athletic analogy, well, if they leave the next year, it's kind of defeating the whole purpose. But really providing, what do our induction and orientation processes look like? What do our supports to first year, and hearing what is done with our first year, even our administrators as well as our teachers, but even with our paraprofessionals and itinerant staff, what are those pieces, those structures that we can put in place to ensure that they will continue on without feeling a sense of isolation or that they are not worthy of staying? So really looking at our systems and structures of retention going forward, but most important of supports, I think would really truly enhance not only the district, but again, prevent someone from stealing our own people. Like I would steal from other people as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You good?
I'm done with my questions, so.
Member Dugan.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So round 2, here we go. So Lynn is obviously a very large and diverse community, but we're also a very proud community. So my question for you is, how do you plan on engaging in and with our community and making our families feel, a part of the educational process, maybe a little bit more than they have in the past?
Well, one, being very visible. I believe I was taught a long time ago by my mentor, Carol Fazio, who was an outstanding principal in the city of Springfield, where visibility is everything. And it's just not showing up and standing in the corner saying that I'm here, but being very actively engaged in community activities. It was asked in the meet and greet about community events. I love community events, and Mr. Pena heard this as well. If you got food, I'll be there. But most important is, again, it's not for show, it's to show a real concern to the community that we're in this to win. And it's not from a personal win myself, but for them and their child and the communities that they represent win. And so being at functions in the community, going to community meetings, which I enjoy immensely, believe it or not, enjoy community meetings, usually if I'm sitting on the side and then not notice, but really looking at the community and holding town meetings. I know town meetings are huge, and they've been just a vast success in Springfield, Hartford, and the few that we had in Boston at Madison Park. And it's just a great opportunity to hear feedback on certain issues that may arise within not only the school but the district, but also give people the opportunity to say, wow, these are individuals who really care about what's going on. We may disagree at times, but they make themselves available for us. And that's what we want to be, an available support for our families and our communities.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
Next question. Believe it or not, I had 10 questions. You know that? And people up here.
You were allowed 4.
No, but you're doing a fabulous job, and thank you. You can take a breath.
Get a chance to see you earlier.
No, but so this question is: so what is your philosophy on delegating authority, and how would you maintain accountability? And could you describe how you would work with principals in this district?
From a support perspective, that's how we work with principals. How do we support them? But one, as the lead administrator in the district, you own the responsibility. And one of the things in a previous interview, as well as my principal interviews, I said, getting a position such as this, it's like buying a house as is. You own everything in that house. Past bills, everything you own. But I see that, but again, you take that on because it is your house. And I see this as a district that, as the lead administrator, I own that and must be accountable for the outcomes. And so how do we look at, from a central office perspective, we should always be in a mindset, how are we supporting schools? It's not from a directive. And it was asked, what was your leadership style? I believe in a shared responsibility, shared relationship with all administrators, where there are no big I's and little U's. But at the end of the day, I understand my responsibilities as the superintendent. And so making sure that we are all operating in accordance to all the laws of the land, but making sure it is a shared responsibility. It's not any big I's or little U's. Because the moment it becomes more dictatorial or more from a hierarchical perspective, things get lost in the sauce. You want everyone to be able to be in a position to lead themselves. And so sharing those responsibilities, I learned how to listen, do a lot more listening as opposed to a lot more just dictating edicts to individuals. So definitely it's responsibility. I get it and own it. But when it comes to structures and operational, it is a team approach going forward. And we're hoping that principals take their cues from that, where they will operate schools under the same manner, where it will not be from a dictatorial position, but from a shared leadership and shared responsibility perspective. So they begin to really mold and shape their assistant principals and other members of their team. So now we are developing that quote unquote, that farm system going forward. If we have leaders, and I've heard that leaders do not leave here, unlike Boston, where it seems like every week we're trying to hire somebody for a new position. But if there were to say that something were to happen, we have a deep bench to really pull some new leaders.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
All right, my second question is, thank you. How important do you feel it is to reach out to our high-risk students, especially those students that have shown patterns of dropping out? Like example, like we have a lot of L's who come in, or unaccompanied minors who are borderline of being an adult, and they have a short period to either get some education or do something, and some of them have to work. Like, how can you elaborate on something specific? How can you reach them? We want to try to get to engage with them.
Going back to Ms. Meg, all means all. But when we created, there was a SLIFE program at Madison. Those are students with limited or interrupted education. And those are those students. And the question becomes, language was the barrier. And so what kind of unique situation can we set up for those students? So one, since we had a little bit of autonomy, since we were a school designated as underperforming, we modified schedules. We modified, now not providing services for them, but what's the schedule look like for them in which we could meet some of their immediate needs? Maybe it's a shortened day with an additional time for them to work. Maybe can we extend, maybe they come in later, because one of the things we found out, we have a number of students, and again, I don't know how it was happening, but they weren't getting until 1 o'clock in the morning from work. And so getting up at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock to get to a 7:30 class, it's kind of difficult. So can we work a modified schedule in which they're coming in at 9 and probably extend themselves a little bit more till after school? What we did create was a Saturday school program for extra supports just for EL students, and they flocked to it because, one, they didn't have to work on Saturdays. So getting there from 9 to 12, and we ran the program for 22 weeks. So all those built-in supports, again, paid for by the school, really aided and supported, where it led to some of the students getting their biliteracy seal from DESE, which was a great deal. But providing those supports and looking at innovative ways and just new methods, just different methods. Again, not saying that we don't want to meet any standard, but no, how are we going to do something a little bit different to meet the needs of these students to move them on? Because it is a huge issue, because they do have a limited amount of time coming from a background with either no or very limited education.
Thank you.
I like that answer. This is the first question, which is a little touchy for me.
Okay.
So the school committee represents the community and entrusts the superintendent to act on its behalf by making decisions in its absence, and reporting to the committee at our meetings, so
Sure.
we know. So what would the relationship between you as a superintendent and the school committee look like? And then the second part is, how would you as a superintendent guarantee that level of trust with our school committee?
I always say collaborate, to answer the first one, it's collaboration. We are in collaboration and in partnership. And when I go with partnership, I use a term, and people be, well, it sounds churchy. I said, well, I like to use the term building a covenant, because covenant means both parties are in this in agreement. It's not that I promise something because that's one way, or you promise, but when you covenant with someone, that is agreement and binds both entities. And that means we're going to build that trust because we are working towards the same common goal. So having that, when there is disagreement, we state disagreement. We're not having this conversation in the community. This conversation is here amongst us, and we really tease that out. And so you will hear me use that word covenant a lot, and it has nothing to do with religion. It's just what it is. We are in both agreement that we will do X, Y, and Z to make sure we are creating the most dynamic school system, not just in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but in the country.
Thank you.
Okay, Lynn Public Schools needs a change in how multilingual students have been supported. Data shows we need to address raising our scores, reducing the dropouts, and reducing absences, especially in high school. What changes would you make to give our ELs the support both academically and emotionally to turn their losses around?
First of all, look at seeing what is currently being done. I think so many times, and I've said it a number of times today, superintendents have the thought that what things have been done before them have no relevance or an importance, and I think it's a total disrespect to the individuals that preceded them. I really want to look at what are some of the structures and practices that we have, and if they're solid, how do we enhance them? If we want greater performance, for example, with attendance, well, what are those structures that we're putting in place currently right now to really enhance it? Is it more communication? Is it more an extra, if we're not using School Messenger, for example, is School Messenger the answer? A talking points, are they the answer? Is it more supports, for example, with a Saturday school program? Maybe that would help. Maybe looking at, for Mr. Pena's question, is it a modified schedule for students? Really looking at what is currently being done and how can we build upon that? And I think those are ways. And when I look at the graduation rate, especially with our EL students, is a 17% gap. So what are the pieces? That just doesn't occur in your junior and senior year. That has probably been going on since middle school. So what are some of the structures that we need to put in place going forward? What are the structures that you have? How can we enhance and build upon those to strengthen those so those students, as they are entering, we don't have that issue going in their junior and senior years?
Thank you.
All right. Could you please speak about your experience working with the municipal side of government, including on finance and budgets, capital projects, as well as any local or even state legislative issues that you've been a part of?
Absolutely. I think that building project over at Putnam Vocational, I think I have never been out of a building more than meeting but it was great to see, and it was great experience working in that project. It was one of the newer projects for the city of Springfield, and it's probably one of its most expensive, being that it was vocational school, but working with the city, which had really dragged its feet for nearly 20 years. Mayor Sarno really made it a point to make that happen, but his predecessor, Charlie Ryan, really kicked it in gear. So really dealing with the city as well as the bonding, and at the time, I think when Springfield was going through some serious issues at the time, being that it was a state receivership and going finance, but folks really working with our legislature, our state reps, who really, again, supported the programs such as that. And they saw the need, especially, and it goes back to the question of our business partners, the Bay State Health Systems, who is a huge contributor to the city of Springfield. There was providing leverage for us. So working with a number of constituencies from the city side, from the state rep, from the legislature side, as well as industry. I think those are opportunities when you start talking large numbers like these projects can be, really being at the table and seeing how effective leverage can work for you, I think was really good. Was really an advantage for me, but also going to Hartford, and Hartford was very successful in really doing the same thing. In Hartford, a little bit of different legislator setup, but really sitting at those tables, being invited to those tables, but having the opportunity to talk about what will be needed to educate the 21st century student and see the importance of that and really selling that to legislatures about releasing funding for those. It really was a benefit for Hartford. And as you know, the conversation you've probably read in the paper, Madison Park is back on the docket for a possible renovation, and I'm praying that it goes through. But it was really fantastic starting those conversations with not only city officials, but state officials as well. And so when it comes to those funding, we're looking at larger numbers, but again, we talk about reimbursement pieces as well. I really bode well for the experiences that I have in those three entities, in those three districts.
Thank you.
Okay. It's round 3, right? Here we go. I get to introduce the rounds. I like that. So, actually, you mentioned the 17% gap. I would even challenge to say it goes back to the elementary schools.
Sure, absolutely.
Which is kind of near and dear to my heart, being a third grade teacher. So my question is, our data shows that there was a fairly significant learning loss with COVID, especially at our elementary levels. So how do you plan to tackle that, and especially at our elementary schools, which those children were very vulnerable to the at-home learning that had happened, and maybe the challenges with that. So.
Well, I know parents learned the work that teachers were doing during that time. And again, reading is not something that every parent is skilled in. Saying parents aren't skilled, but that's a particular skill with teaching and learning, especially it's just really tough. But when we I always look at supplemental programming. I saw today, again, going to the Harrington in the Hood, just saw some just outstanding teaching. I'm not just saying it for the sake of saying it. You just saw it. You saw excited learners. You saw engaged learners. You saw teachers engaging students, and we're really pleased to do it. But when we're looking at what extra is needed, let's look at extra time. And again, front loading those types of supports. And not that you'll have students, again, from a pre-K to grade 3 staying after school for 2 hours, but what are those opportunities that we can have to provide additional time? Again, making sure our professionals are paid for their time, of adding time on. I always go back, Saturday school, again, it was a tremendous, and I go back, the first concept that we had in Springfield was at the William M. DeBerry Elementary School, which started Saturday school. And to see parents dropping those students off, and we had the joke, well, when we babysitting from 9 to 12, they can get all their things done, but yet actual learning was going on. We saw such an increase in not only MCAS scores, but in our district assessments. And so providing those opportunities in short doses over longer stretches of time, and making sure we have individuals who want to do it. So many times we may get people, and again, not casting dispersions on anyone, and we've experienced in other districts, where it's not just sitting there for 3 hours. No, it's really getting results. So looking at additional time, because these last 2 years, I know in Boston, COVID just really exacerbated some of the issues that we had prior to COVID. Now, what are those things that we can do? And I believe it's the supplemental services are huge, but I also think in after-school programs can also be of benefit as well. And when we go to our partners, are our partners' mission and vision aligned to our schools? How are we, if I'm at the local YMCA in a program, what are they doing that can support the schools? Do they have a silent, sustained reading program for 20 minutes? So we ask 20 minutes before they get into an activity. Is there a mentoring program to curb some of the behaviors at some of our community centers or our after-school programs? So making sure that everything is working on a continuum in accordance and in alignment to the mission and vision of the Lynn Public Schools.
Thank you. And I praise your bravery for visiting an elementary school this time of year. It's interesting time of the year to do that.
Well, my wife works at the Warren Prescott K-8 over in Charlestown, and yeah, she's been sick for about a while, for a little bit.
They're not too excited. Not at all.
So, it's one of my favorite questions. Why do you believe you are the best candidate for the position of superintendent, and what motivated you to apply for the job of Lynn Superintendent of Public Schools?
My passion for education. My passion for education is endless, and I would challenge anyone to challenge my passion for education. And I think one of the reasons why for Lynn reminds me of my former home in Springfield. And when I look at Springfield, I look at a city, and as we know, the money stops at Worcester. Western Mass is usually on an island out there, but again, Springfield's a blue-collar city that really that needs a lot, deserves a lot. And again, all it takes is the impetus to make it great. And I see that in Lynn. I see Lynn as a little bit smaller city than Springfield, but a lot of possibilities. And I think this is the time. This is the time to do this here in Lynn. And I'm committed, dedicated, and passionate about the work. Just seeing what I saw today, just hankering for the opportunity. But again, this is not a stepping stone. I think I might have mentioned this in my first interview. This is not a stepping stone to get to Boston or get to Baltimore or get to Washington, D.C. This is to do the work here to make this the greatest educational experience that people have ever seen. And I'm committed to that. And that will be the rubber stamp that I will continuously stamp for anyone that says it. This has the opportunity. Lynn has that opportunity. It's, do we have the will to do it? Can we work collaboratively and as a collective to make that happen for every single family in this city, to be a model and a beacon of educational promise for every single family and for the rest of the Commonwealth to see. So that's my rationale of why I am the best candidate for the superintendency of Lynn Public Schools.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
So we'll just hop right over to me. Our teachers and staff have left our district in large numbers. Last year, over 200 teachers, I believe. And a recent survey on climate and culture by our teachers union showed that over 60% are considering looking elsewhere. How will you use this survey and respond to our staff's concerns?
Really looking at that data, but I go back to meeting with folks face to face. I really want to hear from them, what are some of the issues that you see that are forcing you to leave. I would say one of the most important pieces, and I actually got this working in private industry at Mass Mutual, one of the greatest tools are exit interviews. And so if individuals are leaving, you can gain some great data from why people are dissatisfied with either working in a position or they just need to leave. So looking at that, getting feedback from a number of folks, a number of teachers going by, especially with the union, sitting with them, getting that information. If people are still bent on leaving, let's really do a deep dive into exit interviews and really look at that data and saying, wow, these are our blind spots. These are our blind spots. I didn't see this. So now we are made aware, and then what are the structures we can put in place to lessen the retention rate? Because we don't need 200 people exiting the district. And that's what we saw in Springfield back when, theirs was more contractual, where over 40, they lost nearly 500 teachers. And that's something we definitely want to prevent.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is on the same line as Lorraine just mentioned, but the vision we're now using to move Lynn Public Schools forward has not proven to be successful only because of staff morale is down and sped caregivers are frustrated. Are you comfortable in making whatever changes are needed to move us in a new direction that will make positive changes? And how would you work at bringing the staff, family, and school committee on board with that?
Hopefully with my devastating smile. Okay. Hopefully that'll make some things happen. But I think really understanding the tone and tenor that we're dealing with, understanding what was particular about that vision that folks did not believe in. Because as I indicated earlier, if it hasn't worked, why didn't it work? What are some of the components that were working? How can we enhance them? But most importantly, we're working towards one common goal. Not student outcomes. When I say positive student outcomes, that just doesn't mean MCAS. That's the entire holistic student experience. So if we're working for one common goal, what are those pieces that are preventing that? Is it administration? Is it central office administration? If it is, identify those pieces. If it's from a school leadership perspective, identify those pieces. If it's from a support perspective, from their leadership within the schools, identify. Because once we can identify issues, now we can, as a collective, form structures and supports for them. And when people see that people are making an effort moving forward to support them, to actively engage them, that's when we start to galvanize the school community. And so having that one vision of galvanization towards our one common goal of every child counts and every child will be successful, it's a galvanizing piece to have everyone on that same page. But it's really listening to folks and making sure that they understand also we have standards and as such. If you're being told to do something that you don't want to do, that's a completely different story. But if we're working towards the same goal and we're speaking the same language, we can disagree at times, but the overarching message, one goal, one district goal, and we're unified towards it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Eric. Okay. All right, so my next question, I didn't introduce the round 4, right? Is that where we're at? Yeah. So my next question is, standardized testing in MCAS is part of our reality, and whether we agree with it or not, until legislators change things, it's here to stay. So what do you think your plan might be to, and I saw from, again, your paperwork, working with level 4 schools and helping turn those around a bit. How might you bring that experience to Lynn and help our standardized scores improve a bit?
One of the keys was really looking at, obviously, our tier one curriculum, making sure we can have a vast majority of our students master that, but for those students who required more supports, providing those supports. And it really was that simple. Knowing what students need and providing the supports, and really connecting with families to understand that this is important. And that went a long way. And I want to just sidebar a little bit on that piece. We understood that families were having, from a high school perspective, that some of our students were working to support families. And what we would do, we wanted to really bring families in. We get it. But we want to play the long game with this. This is very short term. And if we do not have your child educated, they're not going in the long run, they're not going to benefit you or themselves. If you can give us this time, we will work with you, support you in the such, because the more time they can give us, maybe that's cutting their hours, and from a short-term perspective, that's going to have an effect. But getting out of high school, having a working knowledge of a particular field, especially if they were in the vocational realm, but most importantly, they had that credential. It opens up opportunity, access and opportunity. And sometimes that was a very difficult conversation to have with parents, but we wanted to see beyond the obstacle to the long-term effect of it. And those honest conversations work. They work. Families had to sacrifice, and they did. And so when we look at those scores, and that was just from a high school perspective, but when we look at those, what are some of those things, having those conversations? Maybe your child needs more time in middle school, and now when we start MCAS in third grade. What does that look like? That means you might have to pick them up a little bit later. That means a sibling may have to sacrifice. But are we willing to make those sacrifices? As a school district, we are. And I know it's going to be tough tightening that belt. But again, looking long term, it is going to be the greatest benefit for you. So those are some of the things. It's just one of the things that was really important for us in raising scores. More time on task, but not teaching to the test. One of the things we noticed about teaching to the test is that you narrow the focus of learning, where it's now just set on standards. If you're teaching across content for standards, students will grasp concepts, because we want education to be very expansive. Your employer is not going to look at your MCAS scores. College admissions aren't looking at MCAS scores. They may look at an SAT, but they're not looking at MCAS scores. So let's really look at an expansive approach, because they will pick up all the things, that the necessary needs that they have to be successful.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
By trade, I am a child protective service social worker for Northern Regional Department of Children and Families. I'm also a newly SEIU Local 509 trustee. I was just recently elected to that position.
Congratulations.
Social emotional learning is very important to me. We've made a lot of traction in this realm in Lynn Public Schools. We are very proud of the work that our staff and leadership and district has strategically invested and followed through with. So my question is going to be around that. Social emotional support is very important in this district. What is your experience with SEL programming? How will you manage high-risk students with the involvement of parents, human services, and teachers to address their needs?
Well, what I saw today in the schools where I was at, especially at the elementary schools, the Harrington and the Hood, they were very intentional with that approach. Every classroom you walk in, it was just an open invitation of joy, an open invitation of joy of learning. At the Hood, every classroom, the way it was set up, it was intentional to elicit positive outcomes for students. And I indicated to Kim Powers, this should be a model not just here in Lynn, but across the spectrum of every educational edifice that we have in this country. So looking at, again, what has been a foundational piece here, just keep working to enhance it, because you have done the foundational pieces. When it comes to at-risk students, the question becomes, are we doing similar practices in these places? what does their learning space look like? Is it conducive to positive outcomes? And if not, how do we do that in a collective manner? Engaging parents. As you know, in your role for DCF, you indicated, how's that relationship between home and school? And what does that look like? And so the more that we know about students, the more we can better serve them. So really opening up lines of communication, continue the work that you've been doing to enhance the social emotional concepts that currently exist, but also looking at if there are other avenues that we can take with other agencies. I know that you currently are working in several initiatives with respect to SEL, but just really keep them just keep them in tune and keep them aligned to the mission and vision of the Lynn Public Schools.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And my last question. How would you creatively approach some of the challenges of having a high population of multilingual learners and students with disabilities in crowded schools, both from an operational standpoint and a curriculum instruction standpoint?
I'll go with the crowded schools. When I look at the average age of the buildings here, 82 years of age, please do not tell me that's my mother's age. I mean, and you have an instance in where schools built in it's still been used in 1800. So what are some of the things that we need to do? And obviously that's going to require funding that the city does not have, but it's going to require some legislative assistance and state support. I really would have us look at the New Haven, Connecticut model. New Haven, Connecticut is one of the larger cities in New England, in Connecticut. You have roughly about 45 schools, but within a 20-year period, nearly all their schools were either renovated or made new. And one was because the superintendent and the mayor were both there for 20 years. So Mayor Nix, we got some work to do. But I think if this comes to fruition and I am selected as super, I would love to have a visit with Mayor Nicholson as well as members of the city council, as well as members of the school to take a trip to New Haven. How was this done? Because that's precedent. So there's a model out there that made it happen. So how do we look at that model to make it happen here? Our students deserve it. Our families deserve it. Our community deserve it. And sometimes there's going to be sacrifice, because I understand you have a couple of at least one project up and running now, and we'll see what happens. But again, it's going to be a sacrifice for a community if a new school has to be built, but it's for the betterment of the entire city. And could you repeat the former ones? I really wanted to hit up on the school ones quick.
And the curriculum instruction standpoint.
Obviously, from a curricular standpoint, making sure that our teachers understand curriculum, understand the strategies that they need to perform their duties, which again, seeing it today in the 2 elementary schools was tremendous. Making sure that we have talented individuals in front, which again, I saw today, really incorporating that and looking at just obviously the things that, from a structural perspective, if there are supports that are needed, we provide those supports. And from today, again, I can't tell you how excited I was today seeing things in action. There's just a lot of good going on here. And again, when I looked at the teaching and learning aspect, teachers are on point. Now, that was just a small sample size today at 2 schools. Now, does that happen across the district? Again, I would have to see it. But if you don't, what are those supports that we need to put in place? There's talent at the central office of folks who can really come in and do some coaching. So again, providing supports, and I can't emphasize that enough, and I sound like a broken record, but it's just the truth. When central office, the goal at central office is supporting schools. It is not to dictate, it is to support schools in an effort to educate people, young students, to the fullest. And as superintendent, that is something that we will do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, my last question. Our special ed department has just had the director resign, so we have an interim. and it's in need of a serious transformation. But many IEPs are out of compliance, and some of our high school SPED programs are struggling to create and follow through with life skill services to prepare their students for their post-graduation careers. And how would you oversee the SPED department so students' IEPs are followed and quality programs are created?
Number one, going out and finding the finest special education director I could possibly find. I don't care what district they belong to, they will be here at Lynn Public Schools to start the school year. But I think getting a qualified individual, again, compliance is key. Compliance is key, making sure students are getting what they need. So really looking at prioritizing, getting someone in that position, providing that individual with the supports that they need, providing professional development if needed by school personnel to understand the importance of just getting compliance done, but getting also the supports of DESE. DESE, believe it or not, is an underused resource. And so if we're requesting support, and again, knowing who to go to at DESE at times is the most important thing. So knowing who we can go to for supports to provide us with those additional supports to help our schools and our district going forward. But it starts with leadership. You have to have a qualified individual in that position and all their underlings to follow. But providing those and getting them down, I think getting that, the priority has to be compliance. Because now we're talking about compensatory services and all the other pieces that would cost the district additional funds that we could be allocating to other entities within the district.
Thank you.
Member Castellanos?
Yeah. Right.
You're good? Good. All right, well, I'd like to thank you so much. Would like to offer you an opportunity to close this out with anything that we weren't able to, that you haven't been able to cover yet, anything you'd like to share that you didn't get to, anything you'd like to leave us with.
First and foremost, I would like to thank the entire board for allowing me this opportunity to be a finalist here in Lynn. I do not take that lightly. I am humbled by this great opportunity, and I mean that sincerely. If this comes to fruition, we'll get an individual who will be tireless in his effort, tireless to promote the Lynn Public Schools at all costs, tireless to show the dedication and commitment that it will take to lead this to be, again, the greatest educational experience that these families have ever had, but make it a true model, a true urban model of educational excellence, not just here in the Commonwealth, but in this entire country that we have here today. So again, thank you for this opportunity, and I greatly I cannot tell you enough, just being here is simply a blessing, and it's just a great opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions from the committee? So thank you so much for being here, Mr. McCaskill. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening, okay?
Thank you.
All right.
So much.
Thank you. So we'll recess till the next interview. Seven.
7, okay.
We don't need to salute the flag again. Yeah. Good evening, welcome.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you so much for being here. We're really looking forward to our conversation, and we will begin with Member Magnolia.
Oh, can I pause for a moment? We're starting with questions. We've had a really difficult fall in the Lynn Public Schools. We've lost a lot of members of our community. I was hoping we could just take a moment of silence for those who are still sick and suffering during this really difficult time.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Do we want to do the introductions just for consistency's sake?
Sure.
Okay, so hello, my name is Tiffany Magnolia, and I am serving my first term here on the school committee. I also work as a professor at North Shore Community College, so I have the privilege of being able to bridge the higher ed and K through 12 divide. And I have one and only question for you. Serving our most vulnerable students, undocumented, teen parents, gender nonconforming, etc., takes a combination of policies, procedures, and caring teachers and school personnel. What do you see as the superintendent's role in ensuring that our most vulnerable students are safely and rigorously educated?
Thank you. May I call you Tiffany or Dr. Magnolia?
Whatever you,
Okay.
just knock yourself out.
All right. Well, thank you for the question. I think parts of the answer are in your question. So what's most important is that we establish policy that protects our students. So policy dictates how we do school, and we have to make sure that we have policies that not only protect students, but affirm students. So when you talk about pronoun usage and things like that, we want to make sure all our documents align with our core value of inclusiveness. In regards to the superintendent's role in how do we center students, so the students who live on the margin, right, need to be in the center of how we do everything that we do. So if inclusiveness is one of our core values, then we have to think about what are not just the school culture and climate, but also what is the instruction, what are the materials, where are we, who are they reading, right? Who are they being exposed to as learners? Are they represented in what they're learning in that curriculum? So there's many pieces to it. So for example, you would need not just policy, you would need to vet your curriculum, you would need to vet your instructional practices, we would need to have training for our teachers, obviously. We need to build community. So in the culture and climate aspect of building community for the most marginalized, we have to make sure that we're welcoming, right? That we're affirming, that we're meeting the needs of those families that are part of our community, and that we're celebrating their strengths, their funds of knowledge, and their assets. There are many students who feel marginalized. So I know when we talk about students being marginalized, the first students that come to mind are students with disabilities or our language learners. But we also have students who are high risk and disengaged. We have students who are chronically absent. We have students who have to work to support their family members, for those students who are older. We have students who are on or could benefit from alternative pathways. So all of those pieces need to be part of the entire LPS structure so that we are communicating to the community clearly in how we advertise and what's on our website, and in how all of those cultures and climates, how that expectation for all our students are meeting their needs. In regards to their needs, there's a lot of professional development that is involved, and so obvious professional development is on language learner strategies or inclusion for our students with disabilities, but there's also a certain section of professional development that doesn't always get addressed, which is developing authentic relationships with family members in order to engage those students that I was talking about that are disengaged.
Thank you.
Hi, Molly. Thank you for coming tonight. Eric Dugan, also serving my first term. I'm a third grade teacher in a neighboring town, so obviously education is really important to me. And my question to you is, what is your most rewarding professional experience in your career? I wonder if you could just provide maybe a little narrative about that.
Oh, my most rewarding. So the tricky thing about education, and I'm sure you know as a third grade teacher, is that those rewarding experiences can be really small and just moments. So if you look at my resume, you would look at moving the building when I was the first year principal of Thurgood Marshall, and we moved from Porter Street to the new building, and that was an enormous undertaking. You could also look at bringing the scores from 4% to 14% in just a couple of years. That was a big undertaking as a first year principal. But when I think of my career, when I think of like moments, they're moments. So I think about when I came back from Chile and my first job was at Salem High School, and I was so excited. I was fluent in Spanish. I was so excited to make connections with the students, and we're gabbing in Spanish walking down the hallway. An Albanian student looked at me and he just said, "I don't speak Spanish." And I thought, now that was a big learning moment for me about how do you develop culture and climate with the community of your classroom. So that was a moment for me that really, it was an aha moment for me. And then if you fast forward to the tech, and I had a really tricky, very challenging class about those at-risk students that we were talking about earlier. And they pushed my buttons all over the place. And they gave me a hard time, and we tried to figure it out and work it out, and I was trying to teach them to read and write. And then somebody out of the blue came in to observe my classroom, and they were perfect. They were like stellar students. And I thought, oh, they're razzing me. Like, that's part of their culture. That's what they do. They razz each other. So, and then that moment of when somebody was actually observing me, I realized, I had some cred with them. Like, they knew they were supporting me in their way. And then another moment was when I was a guidance counselor, and I had a student who had come into middle school with no language. He had come, I don't know, in 7th grade maybe, and he was a first language learner. But I didn't get him English until he was a junior and a senior. And so for the last 2 years, he had a specific goal. He wanted to be number 5 in the class. I think he ended up being number 9, but I chased after him for the Torch Scholarship at Northeastern, and he wasn't going to put it in. He didn't think that he would qualify. I said, Octave, you got nothing to lose. Let's do this. I chased him down, and he ended up getting the Torch. I don't know if you're familiar with the Torch Scholarship, but it's full 4 years. So Octave was, another moment in my career. Then I went to Breed Middle School and met Balaji, who was one of the students who came and spoke on behalf of the previous superintendent, Dr. Tutwiler. And, I came in here, I was surprised to see him. He was sitting right over by the door, and he just gave me a huge hug, and he was so excited that I was going to be able to share in that proud moment of him speaking in front of school committee on behalf of Dr. Tutwiler. So those are the moments, as a third grade teacher, they're just those moments, when you realize that you have a connection with individuals. So we oversee 16,500 kids in the Lynn Public Schools, but every single one of them is an individual that you make a connection with.
Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. I agree. It is those moments, right? Absolutely.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you for your application and coming here tonight, and thank you to your supporters. It's a pleasure to be able to ask this next question. My name is Brian Castellanos. For folks that don't know, I am a third-term member of the Lynn School Committee. and I'm a CPS social worker. I work at the regional level, and I'm also a newly elected SEIU Local 509 trustee. I oversee 17 state agencies. So my next question is, as you can imagine, around social emotional support. As we work so hard in this district, the clinical model with the district's initiatives over the past years of just making amazing investments for our students. Social emotional support is very important in this district. What is your experience with SEL programming? How will you manage high-risk students with the involvement of parents, human services, and teachers to address their needs?
Could you repeat the second part? How will
you manage high-risk students? High-risk students with the involvement of parents, human services, and teachers to address their needs.
So we're talking about having a social emotional curriculum framework in our schools. So I would say that's something that at the district level they've been building out for a few years. So you know that they did the K through 5. They started with that K through 5 team. And then I was on the middle school secondary team to start building that out over the pandemic and last year. The issue, though, is that social emotional learning needs to happen, like you can't wait for a curriculum, right? So we at Thurgood Marshall, and I would say in all schools, all principals have the 5 competencies at the center of their thinking when we're working with students, right? So, self-management, social awareness, self-awareness, the idea that students need to be responsible for their own learning, those things need to be incorporated into the content, the actual Tier 1 delivery of instruction. So if I may, I'd just like to pass out the way I envision Tier 1 and social emotional learning and mental health kind of connecting.
For the record, that wasn't planned. That's a great job. No, I'm just saying, just for the public, that was a wonderful job being prepared for that question.
Well, yeah, we'll see what you think when you look at it, huh? So forget the slide. I have to kind of crosswalk this with you. That front page is just a timeline for an entry plan. But if you sort of fold over, because I'm going to crosswalk you through Tier 1 instruction. So this page, the backside page, and then this page below. So in regards to, these are 2 of the 3 priority areas, I believe, that we need to address here in the Lynn Public Schools, but they're interrelated. So if you look at excellent instruction, Tier 1, PD would be around cultural proficiency and differentiated intervention plans and recruiting and hiring staff of color and rolling out programs, summer programs for intervention. But if you look down below at mental health and well-being, surveying staff and students, selling curriculum integration of competencies, and recruiting, hiring staff of color are interrelated because they need to happen at the same time. So we can't separate what happens in the classroom, right? So how students are engaged with the material is a social emotional experience. You don't separate students, working groups, and get together and students read about a historical event that happened. The historical event that happened that they're reading about could be a triggering event. And so how you weave those 2 things together are critically important. And it's also important to be able to survey and know where your students are. And so at Thurgood Marshall, we work together with the social workers and the guidance department and my department heads and my vice principals, the admin team. We work together on developing curriculum, especially during the pandemic when things were most obviously traumatizing. And we would go through that curriculum or those lessons with our students during an advisory. So we have an advisory structure in our building or at Thurgood Marshall. And so but also at the end of those lessons, there was a few survey questions about how students were feeling about what they had gone through. And then there were very specific questions like, do you want somebody to check in with you? Are you concerned about a friend that you'd like us to check in with? And so then we would follow up. The social workers would then prioritize those students in regards to servicing them as well. Does that make sense? So when we were in the pandemic as principals, most of my experience has been as a principal, so I continue to say we, I realize. Was really a fantastic job being a principal. So during that time, social emotional learning, we were desperate. We were like, we need a curriculum. But it's not that simple. A curriculum doesn't solve really complex problems. And so the social emotional aspect is not just about teaching students how to check in with what they're bringing to that day, or how they're approaching that work, or how they're getting along with each other. It's also about teaching students about how they fit in the world socially, politically, right? Because that's the world that we live in, and how to support for them to be able to be metacognitive about what supports they need and what supports are available. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
All right.
Hey, Molly, how are you?
Hello.
I'm Lenny Pena. I'm a new member of the school committee, and we know each other. My question is, how important do you feel it is to report emergency situations to parents and stakeholders that occur in the school? Like, what's the urgency? Because nowadays, as a parent, we have a lot of, there's a lot of fear going on, security concerns. And then another thing that happens that occurs is that most parents or stakeholders, they get information from students before the school applies. How do you feel, before they get a response from the principal or the administration?
Yeah, thank you. So that's a really complicated question because I don't have my phone, because it would have been distracting to have it here, but students have phone and access to their families, right? So the most important thing is that students and families understand that safety is first. Nothing can happen unless we're all safe. And that's not just physically safe, but socially, emotionally, psychologically, intellectually. What's important, but we understand that families, those are their children, their babies. So families are obviously hyper concerned about their children's safety and knowing what's happening with their children. So we need a very clear communication plan with families. This is the emergency plan. We have an emergency plan. We have a crisis management plan, but we need to include in that plan what the expectation for receiving that information is. So for example, what happens often is a school goes into lockdown. It's a lockdown practice, but students text their families that they're in lockdown, right? And then families are calling or coming, but we can't respond to families until everybody's safe, until the area is cleared, so to speak. And so the key is communicating with families that after immediately after a drill or a practice, which is what we practice right now, we send out a message. After any kind of a practice, we send out a school messenger. When we have events in schools, we send out a school messenger. We contact families. But it's helpful for families to understand that during any sort of an event, we need to address the event and the safety of the event before we can communicate out. Does that make sense? If we were in some sort of like a, God forbid, horrific crisis, there would be a communication tree where you would have the superintendent working with the chief of police, with the mayor, addressing that crisis, and then the second tier communication would go out to families about what is happening, what they need to know, and where they need to go to be available for their children. Does that make sense? That would be the best way, but families get nervous and worried when they don't understand what the plan is.
Thank you.
Hi, Molly.
Hello.
Lorraine Gately. So my question is, we will be searching for a new executive director of special ed. And what qualities would you, as a superintendent, recommend we look for in our search? And in our high schools, we have never mind. That's the one I cut out. This is my old sheet. Never mind. That's the only question is
So
what
the
qualities?
characteristics and qualities of a SPED director. So as probably many of you are aware, the SPED director is there is such a long list of expertise for SPED directors that they're hard to come by. I can rattle off the list of everything that's necessary for a SPED director, but I would say for the Lynn Public Schools, we need to start with somebody, or we need to look for somebody who is a communicator, a collaborator, a delegator, because you need many people in that department to be able to run their own projects, a good personnel manager, but most of all, somebody who continues to put the individual child in the center. So when we talk about students with disabilities, that's a very large category of very individual students. So when we're talking about all of the different types of needs that those students have, each one of those is a different expertise, right? So you have substantially separated, developmentally delayed, intellectually impaired, inclusion students, outplaced students, students who are still here until 22, pre-K. There's just so many categories of children that are in that department. And so you need somebody who has a vision for each of those projects with a project plan that's aspirational. Not what are we doing today, where are we going 5 years from now? But above all of that, we need somebody who doesn't think of students as having disabilities. They're students who have abilities that are different than the norm.
Thank you.
Hi, Molly.
Hi.
Monica Pola. And my question is got to do with Lynn Tech.
Okay.
Lynn Tech has a wait list of 400 students. With the city just last night, the city council voted putting in a new zoning plan to encourage industrial and commercial growth, hoping to attract jobs in the life sciences and manufacturing industry. How can we expand our vocational technical program outside of Lynn Tech?
So that's fantastic. Thank you for that question. It's really exciting time for Voc right now. As you know, what that piece right there speaks to volumes about opportunity for our students. Governor Baker has released a lot of money focused on CTE. In regards to thinking about Voc as a program of studies, it goes beyond just the physical building. And so partnering with business, partnering just like you shared with us here tonight, partnering with biotech, partnering with any entrepreneurs, partnering with higher ed is a big one. That's also part of one of the grants. Is really the way to think about how that program can grow. And so I think your question was both physical. Yeah. So when you talk about, we might need to think, so there's a very specific way that you go through vocational studies, right? So freshman year you do the, what they call like exploratory, and then you choose, and then as you progress, you work towards co-op, and then you do OSHA training, and you leave with certain credentials. But maybe we need to think about different pathways in voc. So maybe we have like, it's not all box cutter fitting into one pigeonhole, but maybe we have pathways that take less time, or pathways that take more time, or pathways that are in the evening, like after dark, or pathways that are for different age brackets, pathways for students like you had mentioned, Dr. Magnolia, the at-risk students, right, those vulnerable students who don't have access to our very strict 7:45 to 2:30 day. We could look at being a little bit more alternative when we think about voc ed.
Thank you.
I'm Jared Nicholson. I'm the mayor. And my question is that the district and school committee, as you know, have elevated diversifying our workforce, both administrators and staff, faculty, as a priority. How would you recruit and retain staff that represent the racial, ethnic, and linguistic diversity of our district?
So that work has already started with the diversification grant. There was, and there has been a lot of PLCing with the DESE around what are the practices. Well, okay, so first we have to talk about anti-racism professional development. Okay, so before we can go out and recruit for teachers of color, we first need to go through, which we are right now, the Hope and Healing. But we also need to dive specific, which is what the diversification grant does also, dive specific into what our practices look like. And then we have to think about how do we advertise? How do we promote who we are so that we're attracting people of color, and particularly teachers of color? And so starting with teachers of color here, with the affinity group, they would be the first place to go to see what that experience has been for them, as well as branching out to colleges specifically, and other districts. I was just on a BIPOC, just free professional development, and they were talking about how they recruit and what their strategies are. And it really starts with an exploration of our root cause. What are we doing wrong? Right? So like where are we going astray in regards to our recruiting? And I would say part of it, we've come out of a pandemic, so there was a bazillion things going on. But one thing I would say, just making the jump from the building leadership to the district leadership, is as a building leader, you don't know all the amazing things that are happening at the district level because they're working hard, but they're not, it's hard then to communicate that back out. And so building principals would also benefit from going through training with specific goals. That's actually one of my goals on here, is it's sort of a realistic goal, but under step 5, increasing our staff of color from 15% to 22%. I think the issue when you have a strategic plan, like our strategic plan that was developed between 2018 and 2019, the one that's carrying us to 2024, has fantastic objectives, strategic objectives, the values, the mission. The piece that's missing is the next layer of what implementation looks like and how you break that down into benchmarks with, the specific action steps for each of those benchmarks. So that, I think that piece is missing, but we certainly have been, incentivizing teachers of color, trying to do the grow your own pathway, grow your own pipeline here with the paras. So there's specific things that we're doing, but I don't know that everybody knows it, and so then it's not being promoted enough.
Do you have any thoughts as well? Thank you for that. Do you have any thoughts as well, particularly on the retention side, like strategies around retention as well?
Yeah, actually, that was a question that came up in yesterday's forum. The retention has to do with the culture and climate of teaching. And right now, and just moving away from just staff of color, just teachers in general, right now, we're facing a crisis. And I see Eric's shaking your head, so you feel it too, and even in another district, right? So this isn't a Lynn problem, this is a public education problem. And I think part of that is that the accountability has become so onerous, and there have been so many asks and demands on teachers with such little time that the joy has come out of the classroom a little bit. And so what we need to do is work together as a team to bring joy and happiness back into the classroom so that teachers feel a sense of efficacy in the work that they're doing, and then start to spread it out. You know, then you can look at teachers of color versus teachers. But right now, teachers of color mostly will report that there continue to be microaggressions in the workforce because we still are not fully trained in how to integrate teachers of color in a workforce that's 85% white nationally. So we're doing the training that needs to happen, but we also have to be thinking very specifically and strategically about what is the culture and climate that we're setting that will retain teachers of color. Because the exit survey is too late, and it doesn't happen. It's hard to get an exit survey, right? So we need to be making that connection, that authentic relationship, and that personal connection with our staff while they're here.
Thank you.
All right, Molly, question number 2 for me is, I was just having a conversation with a good friend of mine about how unique the community of Lynn is, how it's so large and diverse, but also very close-knit, and, you know, you can go to other communities and, you know someone from Lynn, and you always seem to know that person. So my question is, you know, how do you plan on engaging in it and with the community?
Oh, thank you.
As your role in superintendent, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So that was one of my problems of practice that I had when I partnered with Learn Launch at Thurgood Marshall. So I had been doing some professional development with Learn Launch, which is a nonprofit. My whole team was, sort of unbeknownst to each other. We ran into each other in these Zoom meetings during the remote time. So they saw us so many times, they kind of invited us in to partner. And one of my problems of practice was, how do we engage our family members? How can we be more engaged with our family members? And I will say, one of the things they said, we'll start with your strength. And one of our strengths, our biggest cluster, I don't know if you know middle school's in a cluster model, but our cluster that had the most family engagement was our SEI cluster. So our sheltered English immersion cluster. And so they said, what are they doing that's bringing in those family members? And so what they were doing is they were communicating many things. First, excellent instruction. Second, excellent relationships with students. And then understanding that their families were funds of knowledge, right? That their relationship was not transactional, not I tell you what your child's grade is and you tell me how they study homework, but really authentic relationships using talking points, which is a two-way translation, and celebrating student work so that they were inviting those family members in, not just to receive something from an institution, but to actually engage in celebrating their student work. So we spent a year with the theme being, how do you develop authentic relationships with family members? And you don't start with academics. You start with hopes and dreams, cultural traditions in the home, what's important to you as a unit, as a family unit. What do we share? What do we have in common? What's different? And then rethinking open house. And so while that was happening, I was reading a few different books on family engagement, and Karen Mapp is a big one on the dual framework of family engagement. And it really centers the idea in understanding that parents are academic partners, but first you have to build a trusting relationship. So they do want to engage with how their students are doing. When we think about our immigrant families that came here, they gave up everything and they took huge risks, many of them, so their children could have a better education. But when they don't come to school for open house, sometimes we have a deficit mindset and say, oh, they don't care. Well, they just gave up everything, their family, their country, their language, to come here to educate their kids. We can't say that they don't care because they didn't come to our open house that was on our time, that was convenient to our schedule. We have to go to where the families are. Oh, and so that was the question, sorry, how would I do that? Yes, so my idea, so the way that I would do that is, the same way that Learn Lunch had kind of mapped that out, is by having, I would want to have a superintendent's council, a family council, and I would want to also have a student council as well as superintendent. Zooms and open houses, going to where people are. Like, so if I'm going to have, let's say I'm going to have like quote unquote office hours, my office hours don't have to be here, right? My office hours could be at a local church, they could be outside of Market Basket, they could be in a gathering place at the YMCA, they could be wherever my families are, right? I could go to the Gregg House. I am very mobile, so I can meet families in a central location that's easy for them in order to engage with them. And then obviously just being where they are, which is they're at sports, they're at the concerts, they're celebrating the gifts of their children. And so you would expect to see me there as well, celebrating.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Molly.
Mm-hmm.
I have the next question. What is your philosophy on delegating authority? How would you sustain accountability district-wide? And could you please describe how you would work with principals in this district?
Okay, so let me get this.
Let me go to
Delegating authority in general.
So what is your, I'm going to repeat the question. What is your philosophy on delegating authority?
Mm-hmm.
How would you sustain accountability district-wide?
Mm-hmm.
And could you please describe how you would work with principals in this district?
Okay. Thank you. So, sorry I got stuck on that question. I'm just not interested in positional power, so I don't think of authority. It just threw me off. So we're talking about like distributive leadership. In my mind, I think what worked well at Thurgood Marshall is that I have a team. So in that structure, I had a team, and as a team, we were all committed to, let's take the sustainability plan, for example. We were all committed to our vision and our mission, and then our 4 turnaround practices for sustainability. And then each of my team members oversaw each of those projects, and then we would work together where there was crossover, because just like excellent instruction and social emotional health and well-being are interrelated, so are all of our practices, all of our best practices. So wherever there was intersectionality, we would work as partners. But I would oversee the program. And so that's how I envision this, right? So each member of executive leadership, they have a department, just like my department heads have a department, or my vice principals oversee a department, or student engagement. They have a department that's like a reporting structure, but what we need to do is think of school and think of the district as project management. So how are each individual on the team would be overseeing a project and would be collaborating on that project. So when you talk about student engagement, right, and at-risk students, right now I'm putting together a team for alternative pathways. And so it's a research team at this stage, but that research team has a lot of intersectionality. So you have a special ed representative, an MLE representative, a representative from wellness, working on that project. they're also doing their job duties. Principals have a whole structure, right, in their schools. And so in order to collaborate with principals, they too are responsible for our strategic plan. And they need to have opportunity where they can come together and share their best practices and collaborate on certain areas or strategic indicators. So in terms of authority, I don't think of it so much as authority as I think of it as leadership, and really facilitating the best ideas and raising those ideas up, and then, looking for the results. I mean, the idea's not good until the student achievement says it's good, right? Until you've met your goal of improving the quality of education for our students.
So distributive leadership.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. I'm never going to say authority. I just want you to know. I think I've learned something tonight. Thank you.
I wasn't schooling you.
No, it's okay. You have a 3.9. Your GPA's across your transcripts. I already saw that coming. I appreciate it though, but the accountability piece. Could you just elaborate more? What I was looking for was more.
Sure. So when you say, so there's so many levels of accountability, right? So when you're talking about accountability, you're talking about the accountability system of MCAS?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. So I would publicly like to say I object to the accountability system of MCAS. I want to say that. Because here's the thing, and Eric, I need you to help me out here, right?
My best.
Tell me that in your school you do more than math, English, and science.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So the problem with school being accountability, I am a turnaround school. I'm sorry, I am no longer at Thurgood Marshall. My beloved school is a turnaround school. We had a fantastic culture and climate. We held kids during a pandemic. We held each other during a pandemic. Our school was a safe place to go. They went through, I was going to use a different word. I'm going to skip that word, but they went through unimaginable trauma. And they came to us. And they told us about it, and we kept them safe. And we tried to teach English, math, and science as well. And here's the careful balance. They need English, math, and science. They have to have English, math, and science to get ahead to change the trajectory of their life. And so one person that I forgot to mention earlier in my greatest achievements question was Elise, who was one of my favorite students. I know we shouldn't have them, but she was really affirming for me as a teacher. She was a fantastic student, and she was a good student. Her brother was in the other class that I mentioned. So Elise was a good student. We were able to do grade level work in an SEI setting. But I saw Elise many years later, and she was wearing a headscarf because she had cancer. And she said to me, "Thank you, Mrs. Cohen, for teaching me English, because I had to translate for my mother all the medical jargon while I was going through what I was going through." So when we talk about education, we talk about life and death. And that's what we were doing during the pandemic, but that's what we do every day. And so accountability is critically important, Brian, but we have to set realistic goals on the growth that we can make, and then we have to progress monitor it. And I think what happens when we talk about accountability is we look at last year's MCAS scores, and then we look at next year's MCAS scores, and we don't have a specific target for what we're going to move in between. And so when you don't have a specific target, then it's vague. And so our movement ends up being vague and sort of we're doing our best, I hope we do well, or I hope we do better than we did. And so I'm very thankful that in the last few years, we've contracted with iReady, so now we have baseline scores, and then we have mid-year scores, and then we have end-of-the-year scores, and we can track where the students are today We can formatively assess, and then we can address that with scaffolds and differentiated materials to help them move along the spectrum. So I bring up Elise because that's the balance. Accountability isn't critically important, but I think where we go wrong is we're vague in what our benchmarks are, not the final goal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. So the next question I have is, how important do you feel it is to reach out to our high-risk students, especially those students that have shown patterns of dropping out, like specifically like L's or unaccompanied minors who come here and there's a short period that they have to, like how, and can you elaborate on a specific, situation where you engage in that,
Yeah, my career.
Right.
So those are my kids, right? So the challenging part about L is that when we use the word L, that's like saying a human being. I mean, such a huge category, but your question was specific to the high risk. So high risk students that don't have the language skills or come without the language skills, they do need a specific pathway with more scaffolding and more supports because they are missing that piece that's going to help them get through to a career path, right? And so that is one of the reasons why I have that alternative research project that we're working on. One of those pathways is for ELS. So one of the creative ideas with Lynn Public Schools is that the After Dark program, which opens up it was 2 vocational studies for students. And so it would behoove us to look at looking more specifically at that data of our L's, because like I just said, there's so many different reasons why students can't engage. Some students simply have to work. Some students have to take care, they end up being the primary care provider at home, so there are, barriers to getting to school. Some students don't have transportation. So just like we need to meet our families where they are, we also need to meet our students where they are. So I think, I don't know what the research will show, because we just are going to start it now, but I think it's something to think about, like our flexible thinking around voc studies is being flexible about what we offer in the Lynn Public Schools for pathways for students. So if you have older students, right, who are going to age out before like being able to graduate with enough credits at a 12th grade level, but we want to be able to support those students, then we might start thinking about what kind of education or coursework would help them to achieve like maybe a GED with a voc certificate. Like we could get creative on how to meet their needs to be able to give them an opportunity to make a living. But I just want to publicly say here tonight that not all L's, remember Octave, my example of Octave came in and ended up with a Torch scholarship at Northeastern. So remember, there are many different types of L's, and some of them end up at Harvard. So I want to remember that I just don't want to walk away with the stereotype about who L's are.
Thank you.
Okay. Back to me.
Okay.
Our teachers and staff have left our district in large numbers. Last year, over 200 teachers. A recent survey on climate and culture by our teachers union showed that over 60% are considering looking elsewhere. How will you use this survey and respond to our staff concerns?
Yeah, that's a crisis. So starting with the data points, I don't know if in the survey it had specific reasoning. So the way that I would address that is to start with what
You didn't see it?
the staff exited.
Oh, okay.
Sorry,
I thought you did.
No, I did not. Okay. I didn't see the data points. So I would have started there. So address the data points, cluster them into themes, pull together a team, particularly people who are willing to be vulnerable, and then I would have to plan the action steps based on what they shared with us for reasons why they're leaving. What I heard in yesterday's forum, though, is that there is, it sort of is related to the accountability piece, that joy of teaching has sort of dimmed, right? Sort of gone away a little bit. And so I believe that you wake up every morning in order to fulfill a purpose, that we all feel driven to fulfill a purpose. Sometimes you don't even know what that purpose is, but you know when you're fulfilling the purpose because you have a sense of efficacy. And so if teachers are coming into the classroom without the proper training, without the time to be able to be familiar with the curriculum, without the skills or strategies or philosophy around how do you incorporate scaffolds and differentiated materials, or time to be able to unpack best teaching strategies with peers and colleagues, then they come into the classroom feeling less than. And so nobody wants to stay in a job where you feel less than.
Yeah, I used to walk into my room and say they paid me to do this because it was so
Because you loved it. Right,
Absolutely
exactly.
loved it.
Exactly.
So it's like really difficult to hear from other teachers and to look at the results of that survey and wonder how are we gonna change that. So-
Right. But that survey doesn't just represent Lynn.
Right.
I mean, I know that survey represents Lynn, but I mean, the teacher shortage and the teacher crisis is a national problem because, again, of the pressure and the stress that we put on teachers has become so overwhelming that we don't get to go to the basics of loving what we do. And so that would be this job.
Right, exactly.
Challenging job. But the job is to figure out how to be bold enough and courageous enough and fearless enough to work with the DESE and work with partners around how do we reimagine school and where do we start to draw the line on I need to protect teachers from that much stress, right? And so I think the way that we do that is that we start where we are by building capacity, by bringing teachers together for professional development. That's one thing that I've noticed in the new structure that we have this year with bringing principals down once a month for PLC. The joy that principals experience when they're working together on content and curriculum, it's like, that's why we became educational leaders, and to be able to create space for teachers and educators and leaders to do what they love is critically important. And so we have to rethink that school day where there is time in that day, more time in that day, for colleagues to be able to collaborate around that great lesson plan, that when you deliver a great lesson plan, there's no bigger joy than that, right? When it just runs itself. But that takes a lot of planning.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Lynn Public Schools needs a change in how multilingual students have been supported. Data shows we need to address raising scores, reducing dropouts, and reducing absences, especially in the high school. What changes would you make to give RLs the support both academically and emotionally to turn their losses around?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, thank you, Donna. That is a complicated question in Lynn because of the variables that are involved. So when I first started here, about 20 years ago, I was able to teach the SEI course because we had like 15% Ls in the district. And so that cohort was small enough that all of the EL teachers had 2 certifications. So I had the ESL certification and the ELA certification, and the same with like the whole department. And we were able to cohort those students in a way where we all chose to be EL. We all had the expertise of EL. And then in the last, 5-6 years, our numbers have grown so big. So when I was a principal, I did have that cohort. I had that organization, but it couldn't work as the numbers started to grow because, now we're towards 40% of Ls. And so those Ls have to be cohorted with teachers. And back to the conversation that Lorraine and I were having is that our teachers don't feel that they have the efficacy to be able to do the differentiated and scaffolded work, but they do. They just don't have that time to be able to receive that PLC specifically around how to support students at varying proficiency levels. So the district has rolled out EL strategies and a whole plethora of professional development around how to support Ls. The place where it falls, which is often what happens with PD, probably the educators here can agree with this, that when it's sort of presented as a modular or as a course, it's the follow-up coaching that kind of falls off. So you learn about the strategies, but then it's the practice, application, and feedback loop that needs to happen in order to apply that throughout your lesson planning. And that's the part that's missing. And so the other piece that's complicated about this is we're in a teaching crisis. So we have a lot of ESL holes because we can't find teachers to teach and support. And so that loops back to the recruitment. So we need to continue with the partnerships and the fellowships with Salem State and all of the colleges in the area in order specifically incentivizing for students of Ls, but the structure has to be there where they're also able to collaborate with one another. So it's a campaign on rethinking the time in the day and rethinking how we're supporting the professional development that we're delivering. The MLE department, comparatively speaking, is quite small when you think about 40% else being in the district, right? So there's not a whole lot in that department itself, there's not enough capacity to be able to support that delivery and coaching of teachers with Ls. But nonetheless, that's the pathway.
Thank you.
Could you please speak about your experience working with the municipal side of government, any work you've done on finance or budgeting issues, capital projects, or experience with local and state legislative processes?
Sure. I'm going to look over at Kevin. I hope I haven't had any budgeting issues. So I'll start with, I'm all over the place because with the capital projects, obviously Thurgood Marshall moving from Porter Street to to Brookline Street was a huge endeavor, right? And being on the building committee and overseeing that work, was really, it was very edifying how to work with, construction workers and how to work with project managers who are not in education. So those meetings were just very different than being in an educational setting. So my experience with Thurgood Marshall, and now I'm sitting on the Pickering Committee and doing the work with the Pickering Committee, and then budget obviously are in both those buckets, but budget's also in the school environment because as there are many different budgets. So the budget in terms of the school's budget, the approach to the school budget is to start with your core values, right? And are they represented in our strategic action steps? And then are we funding each of those strategic objectives properly, right? And then with the TAG grant, the targeted assisted grant for being a turnaround school, that's a similar process where you have a certain amount of money, and then you have to determine how much money of that to allocate to each of your turnaround practices, whether it's resources or stipends or personnel, training, professional development. In regards to relationships with municipality or legislators, as a building principal, I wouldn't say that that's something that happens all the time or very often. In a district where building principals are supported by the district, other than like casual relationship, in terms of celebration and citations and things like that. But as a superintendent, it would be different because you would be advocating for the Lynn Public Schools and partnering with the municipal side. And so I see a lot of commonality between the direction that City Hall is going in terms of like inclusionary zoning and the ARPA funds that are supporting the nonprofits in the city. Those nonprofits have the same values as the Lynn Public Schools as well. And so I just see an intersection of opportunity for being able to communicate in both areas, being able to celebrate the things that we're doing in both areas, being able to bring the whole community together. So you have like the family residents, and then you just have residents, and remembering and kind of doing a little like public relations around how your schools, any school in America, is really the center of that community, whether you have students in that community or not. I don't think that there's a vibrant community out there that has failing schools. Schools also determine whether or not a community is vibrant. So in this role, it would be about building authentic relationships, understanding what both sides need, and being able to come to consensus and agreement about moving forward on the same mission work.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Okay, and for the rest of the committee members, I'm just going to flip-flop my question number 3 and 4, just so everybody's kind of on the same page as me. So you brought up MCAS a little bit earlier, and I am in agreement that is a small piece of what children are learning. However, it is our reality, and it is something we need to deal with. So I guess my question is, do you have a plan to help students of Lynn perform a little bit better on those standardized tests, whether it be MCAS, district tests, whatever it might be?
Yes. So we have right now with our R-Ready scores about 60% of our grade level scores are 3 grade levels behind where they should be. So that's concerning. And you saw at the school committee meeting so many weeks ago that our MCAS scores are about the same, right? And so the issue about making educational progress, and I'm sure you feel this too, is that it is a slow process, which is really frustrating and sort of speaks to that teacher crisis when you have a sense of urgency to meet your students today, but the plan is going to take years. And so that's sort of the idea here when you look at excellent instruction, that tier 1 instruction. So there's a couple of plans. One piece I didn't put in here is the ESSER funds. So, the ESSER funds are going to expire. So it's important to use the ESSER funds on things that are not going to be sustainable because we're not going to have those funds going forward. So putting money into tutoring, after school programs, summer programs, intervention programs now, and taking that money and sort of infusing it now to meet that sense of urgency for our students who are in front of us right now is a pathway. And I think that we also have to think creatively about what that looks like, because to Lorraine's point, our teachers are burnt out, and so they just don't have any left to give for after-school programs and summer programs. So I think we're going to have to look at bringing in outside consultants and tutoring programs. The way we go through Charlie Gallo, we'll set up tutoring with tutoring consultants. Maybe we could partner with peers or college students to do tutoring. It'd be really fabulous to partner with LPS graduates to come in and do some tutoring. But we could spend those funds now on the students who are most in need. But in terms of the longer scale, like when you're thinking the longer program, that's building things that are sustainable. And so that has to be centered in anti-racism work, culturally proficient work, social emotional. How do we integrate social emotional competencies with culturally proficient materials that are affirming for our students? And then how do we also integrate more professional development on inclusive practices? Because the SPED department hasn't had a whole lot of attention with professional development over the last few years, being in the crisis that we were in. They had compliance issues that they had to address. We had transportation matters that we had to address. But we have to revisit and prioritize professional development for inclusion and for inclusive practices. So when you look at this plan, it's very specific. So, first you talk about the professional development and hiring staff of color, but then when you look in step 2, which is really next year, we then have to set those targets that I was talking about. And so a target for a district would be reviewing the lesson plans, like so many lesson plans in the district, and doing lesson studies, which is centered on academic discourse and culturally proficient materials, and then, but setting it realistically. So you're not going to do that. You're not going to be able to do that across 26 schools, but in one, season. So being able to really target the schools that are most in need. And that is something, when you talk about that sense of urgency, 20% of our students are below 10 percentile, and 20% of our schools are below the 10th percentile, and 50% of our schools are below the 20th percentile. So these schools need that targeting. And that's one other thing in terms of what can we do. So in the DESE, they have SSOS, schools and systems of support. I think we need that office here, internally. And we need the pathways in early college. So I sort of envision Dr. Gardner's work expanding into its own office with members under her, or under that office, where that project that I was talking about, that project management, and they become project managers for that type of work. You have to put personnel where the need is.
Thank you.
My question. So I was just making sure that my next question wasn't in here, which I don't think it is. I just want to make sure it's not yet. It's around vocational pathways. You're pretty familiar with pathways. And my question is, according to a recent NPR article, the title is High Paying Trade Job Site Empty While High School Grads Line Up for University. Lynn needs high-paying jobs. We have a vocational school. What does vocational expansion mean to you? Mm-hmm. How would you achieve this as superintendent? And if you could elaborate around industry, how we could partner up.
Yeah, sure. So Mr. Ridley used to always say, if you have a trade, you have it made. When I first came in, he had a T-shirt that said it. We said it after every faculty meeting. And I was young. It was one of my first jobs. And I was like, oh, that's nice. But I was on the academic side, so I didn't really understand it. Until a few years later, when I saw one of my own schoolmates from many years ago living in a multi-million-dollar house as a plumber, and I was like, "Ooh, I maybe should have done the trade route." So at 100%, and I don't know, Brian, to be honest, what the future holds when you think about college has really outpriced itself. And I think people are getting back to roots about being skilled. And one thing that we did at Thurgood Marshall, a few things, is bringing in pseudo vocational studies and partnering with industry, to your point. So this last year we had the Amazon Future Engineers program, which is a super cool program. So, and I know, sorry if I tell this story again,
Oh,
Mayor
go ahead.
Nicholson.
Yeah.
Okay, so Amazon Future Engineers called out of the blue, and that salesperson explained, and by the way, it was free. I mean, I didn't have to buy anything, so I shouldn't call him a salesperson. Let's say an advocate. So he explained that Amazon had noticed like a lower standard or a lower, less skilled Amazon employees coming in for the first year. And so they tracked it. They tried to figure out why is this happening? So they went back to college studies, and they said, oh, it's kids coming into college. So they were able to track it back to the AP computer science class in 11th grade. They said that's where the fall off is. That's where kids score less or lower than they used to. So they didn't start there. It's too late there. So they said, we got to go into middle school. So they developed a 3-year program, a 3-year curriculum around, computer programming. And so last year we did 6th grade, and then our teacher, Timon Tran, if you remember, got Amazon Future. Yeah, so we got $25,000, which was kind of nice little bonus. But the point is that just like Octave, which I'm obviously bringing up many times, Octave, who came with the ambition to go to college, but he had that ambition in middle school. Middle school is where that VOC introduction needs to start and happen, where we need to get students excited about the future possibilities and where they can explore. And so we did a few things. We did that. We did Spark Alpha, where they partnered around like an engineering design, and then they had a Shark Tank, and they had a competition. We also had sort of a pseudo co-op happening where seniors from LVTI were coming to the middle school and their shops, they didn't qualify for a official co-op through LVTI, so they came over and partnered with the teachers at Thurgood Marshall in 4 different areas. So in terms of that VOC resurgence, I think it needs to start earlier in the middle school, and the exploration needs to start there as well. It's kind of connected to the MyCap grant that we got right around the career academic plans, like what your thinking is. There's a whole curriculum on that, and that also starts in middle school. Oh, and then your connection to industry, right. So Amazon's an example of a connection to industry. I mean, I think the biotech that's being invited into Lynn is another great opportunity. It's important to look around at who our partners here are, but they're looking for skilled workers, right? Everybody's looking for skilled workers, and as inflation goes up, like the more skilled workers, the better, because those opportunities, will be there.
And going off your point to the younger, again, going back to younger, we have discovery. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I appreciate you elaborating that piece, very important. And what the Amazon, again, going back to those opportunities, very, very important. So thank you for that thorough explanation.
Over to me. Okay, this one is about the school committee, and as you know, the school committee represents the community and entrusts the superintendent to act on its behalf by making decisions in its absence and reporting to the committee at our meetings. So what would the relationship between you as the superintendent and the school committee look like? And I sort of have an idea what it would. And how would you as superintendent guarantee the level of trust with our school committee?
Thank you. Hey, Mary, do you mind passing out one more thing? Thank you. So, and you don't have to read all of this, by the way. I'm going to direct you to a page. Don't worry.
Thanks, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm only just going to read a few things that I'd like to highlight. So when approaching this work, well, first, before I read this to you, I need to say that we have to start by building a relationship.
Yep.
Right? And that relationship has to be authentic. So you can't trust me until you know me. And so this front page, which I'm not going to read all of, but I just want to highlight. So this is who I am, and this is what I believe. Theory of action: if the Lynn Public Schools prioritizes a sense of belonging by implementing an equity lens in delivering rigorous instruction and high-quality professional development, then all students will experience innovative, culturally proficient, and personalized instruction centering the student experience in meaningful, real-world application that result in positive academic achievement. So that is my theory of action, but that might not be your theory of action. So I think the first thing that we would have to start with is a retreat on getting to know each other, understanding what our theory of action is, committing to what our vision and core values are, which I would also, this piece I really want to publicly read. It's already something you know, but this was created by the community in the Lynn Public Schools in 2018, and I personally feel very committed to it. Drawing upon the strength of our community, our families, our students, and our partners, Lynn Public Schools commits to fulfilling the intellectual, physical, and social-emotional potential of all our students. We work together so our students learn to thrive, advance, and impact the greater community and the world. That we did agree to, and that doesn't expire until 2024. I don't think it needs to expire. I think we need to dive deeper into it because this plan, the strategic plan that we have, was interrupted by a global pandemic. And so what I propose is that we first have to start to get to know each other. So we need to do a retreat. But with your agreement, I would say it would behoove us to spend all of next year, the coming school year, bringing back the consultant, I think it was Lori Likas, bringing back community members, and progress monitoring, where are we on that plan? Because part of what was missing in that plan were the specifics. They talked thematically about things we need to do, cultural proficient, anti-racism work, but it didn't speak to those benchmarks. And if you're not specific, then you can't really gauge how you've done. So next year, I think we need to go through as an entire community, progress monitor, and then edit and move forward with another 5-year plan that really is built off the shoulders of this one. And then in regards to, just quickly, so this just kind of explains what my entry plan would look like and collecting survey data and those types of things. But a key piece to relationship is how we communicate. And so I have a section under here about school committee communication planning. And so being really clear on when do we communicate, how do we communicate, how do we come together in setting agendas for school committee. What is just like the question around family members wanting to know about emergencies, what is the expectations of school committee wanting to know about certain emergencies, in what format, in a text, in an email, in a phone call, through Mary? There are a lot of ways, there's a lot of specific expectations that we would need to establish. But it all starts with a conversation and building trust.
Thank you.
Okay. Our special education department is in need of a serious transformation. Many IEPs are out of compliance. Some of our high school SPED programs are struggling to create and follow through with life skill services to prepare students for their post-graduation careers. How would you oversee the SPED department so students' IEPs are followed and quality programs are created?
Okay, so when overseeing a program, you bring together a team of experts, right? So I would need to bring together SPED department the SPED district personnel and building personnel, and look at the different data points for each of those. So until I know exactly what the data is, I can't know exactly what the plan is. So, what is the data on the number of IEPs that are out of compliance? What are the survey results from students in the life skills program? What are the benchmarks? Have they hit those benchmarks? As you know, there was a recent audit on life skills, so there's already data that we can work off of that audit. They already have an action plan for life skills and building a more robust curriculum for that. Also on that team would have to be family members and students. I think it's important to have students involved in the process of school improvement. And then what are the goals for moving forward? So when so at Thurgood Marshall, traditionally, we didn't have department heads. That was something that I advocated for, and I was able to bring on department heads into the middle school. Again, to your point about building capacity in the middle school has a tremendous impact on the high school, right? You have to be excited and invigorated and well skilled before you can go into the high school and be successful. So when bringing on the department head, that was our department head's first goal. So as both the student learning goal and the professional goal of the department head was to do the IEP process, like retrain, and be very clear around expectations and workshops on how to write personalized IEPs that meet the students' needs with the appropriate goals. So there's a training component that's involved as well. So that is that's a component that we would have to see. So actual data points, survey points, and then benchmarks for growth.
Thank you.
I think I'm done, thank you. Yeah, thank you. It's my final question of the night. It's my favorite. Why do you believe you are the best candidate for the position of superintendent, and what motivated you to apply for the job?
That's a good question. So I'm only laughing because best for me, it's this isn't a competition with a prize. This is an incredibly difficult job during a crisis of a teacher crisis, a reimagining public school crisis, and we're looking at an economic instability right now. So it's not like an attractive job, frankly. So the reason why I applied for superintendent is because I love Lynn. I love the Lynn Public Schools, and I believe that we have the skill and the will and the funding and the support from the community to make the Lynn Public Schools the best that the Lynn Public Schools can be. And we suffered a greater impact from the pandemic because we already had inequities that are beyond us, that we didn't create, right? We have barriers that we didn't create. But what's beautiful about Lynn is that it is a multicultural community that welcomes the diversity into the city and that people become the fabric of Lynn. And so we have multiple different residents of Lynn, some that go all the way back to when Lynn was first, what do you call it, Mayor? Are you established as a city?
Incorporated.
Incorporated, thank you. So all the way back to being incorporated, We have families here all the way there, and then we have families who just arrived yesterday. And people still feel a sense of belonging in this community. And I believe that my skills in building teams, well, first, in loving kids and in loving people and in working to better the lives of others is where I start. That's my purpose. But some of the skills that I have to help with that are my ability to communicate with people, my ability to connect with people, and my ability to motivate people to get on mission. And that mission has specific data points, objectives, and benchmarks that we can assess and then reset the course if we need to. But I love the work. So, back to the positional power. I'm not interested in a title, but I am interested in the work.
My last question. How would you creatively approach some of the challenges of having a high population of multilingual language learners? And we've discussed this several times. And students with disabilities in crowded schools, both from an operational standpoint and a curriculum instruction standpoint.
Yeah. So,
Like, in the high schools, you have a number of ELs. They start out with small class sizes, and then they just keep adding. But one teacher would have like 30 or more in a classroom, and there's no additional supports, and then that's basically what I'm looking to see when I'm talking about operational. How are we going to fix that? How are we going to fix the disconnect with some of our curriculum instruction? Like those things that we've already discussed.
So the overcrowding is an absolute issue. I do, before you all take this home, because I know that you're just dying to read it, so I might as well just skip to the last page. So for the facilities plan, you're going to notice that the facilities plan, I'm not able to do that on my own. The facilities plan takes several stakeholders, really all the residents in Lynn, to set criteria on what our vision is for building out in the schools. So in regards to overcrowding, that piece I can't address alone in isolation. I can't even imagine it, because we have to set what the criteria is for the community in regards to imagining how schools look across this city. So that's the only problem with the overcrowding piece. In regards to how students are scheduled, and whether or not there's capacity, like there's enough teachers to meet the needs of all of our students, that's bringing together a team, and that's something that we've been talking about recently around with the principals, especially in the comprehensive schools. We have to relook at the schedule and whether or not it's meeting the needs of our students. It could be just a master schedule issue. Not just, by the way, the master schedule is everything, but it could be some of the dilemma could lie in the master schedule. And then there's another issue with LVTI. So we recently partnered with, MLE, Principal Gallo and myself, partnered together in getting a planning grant around how to bring more equity, more L students into the vocational school. And so we're looking at that planning because given the way the application process works, we have a very low percentage of Ls in the vocational school. It's like 16% or something, as opposed to like 33 and 35% in the comprehensive schools. So we also need to look at that too in terms of a pathway for our Ls. But yeah, so it takes a lot of bringing together a team to look at what exists, to find what the root causes are, and then coming up with a strategy.
I'm glad you're looking into that pathway.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other committee members have any questions? So we'd like to give you a chance to cover anything that you weren't able to get to, or just anything you'd like to leave us with.
Ooh, that's a tall order. Okay, so I would like to say that this is a privilege. And I feel privileged because all the people that I've worked with have brought me here, have carried me here. I'm only here because of the teams that are behind me and the teams that are behind me over here. So I am really honored. Not many people sit in this seat and have the opportunity to apply for the highest position in the educational structure of a school district. So I just want you to know how privileged and honored I am at that opportunity here now. And I don't know that I need to summarize that my passion is in bettering the Lynn Public Schools, but that needs to be a collaboration by exploring what other experts in the field and what the expertise in the city is, and facilitating that creativity in order to go forward. And that's the work that I love to do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Molly.
Thank you very much.
Committee can adjourn the meeting if there's a motion.
Motion to
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Adjourned.
Absolutely. Hold on.